In this video, we're going to be talking about how to perform a multi-point inspection on a vehicle. Most shops, especially dealerships, expect that every vehicle that comes in the shop door will receive a full multi-point inspection. So the first thing that we do is we want to check the vehicle over. So we're looking at the headlights, checking for any cracks, visibly checking the surface of the headlight to see if it's cloudy and oxidized. It may need a headlight surface. Also checking the windshield for cracks. Inspecting the mirror. So the mirror looks good. Checking all the glass and just doing a basic walk around the vehicle. If you did find any dents or anything else during the walk around, just note it on the multi-point inspection sheet. The first thing you want to check when you first turn the vehicle on is to ensure that all of your dash indicators do illuminate and to make sure that they turn off after 2 seconds. If there is an indicator that does not turn off after 2 seconds, note that on the multi-point inspection. Next, you're going to check to make sure your wipers and washers work properly, both the front and the rear, before you pull the vehicle in. When the vehicle is first brought in, you want to ensure that the turn signals are operating properly, parking lights, high beams, and flash to pass. In the rear of the vehicle, you want to ensure that the brake lights, reverse lights, turn signals, and the often overlooked rear tag lights are illuminated. You can do this with the help of a technician or inspection mirror. Now let's check under the hood. One of the first fluids we're going to check besides washer fluid is coolant. There is a full cold line and a full hot line that we're going to observe through the side of the either surge tank or overflow tank. Now we're going to look at the coolant itself using a simple hydrometer, which is appropriate for a multi-point inspection, by removing the pressure cap. Make sure that the vehicle is not hot when you remove the pressure cap. Squeeze the bulb at the top of the hydrometer, release, and coolant will flow into the hydrometer. Now we're going to be able to see if the fluid looks nice and clear or if it looks muddy and maybe needs to be replaced. Also, we're looking at the level of freeze protection that the coolant offers. So this hydrometer is telling us that we have freeze protection up to -50 degrees. After that, we simply put the coolant back into the surge tank, making sure that we don't drip any coolant on the surrounding areas, and then reinstall our pressure cap. Some power steering fluid reservoirs are clear that you can look through to see if the power steering is full or not. This one has a dipstick. You can also check power steering fluid by placing a small dab on a white sheet of paper. If it looks black, you may want to recommend a power steering fluid service. With brake fluid, you never want to open the cap. Now, if you do notice that your brake fluid is low, then that indicates that you most likely have either low brakes or you have a leak somewhere in the system. So never add fluid to a brake fluid reservoir. Always check the brakes first to make sure everything is operating properly. Now we're going to check the condition of belts and hoses. We want to make sure that the hose is not too hard or too soft. So one way to check this is to look at the hose where it meets the hose clamp where it attaches to the radiator. If it's bulging on either side, the hose needs to be replaced. For the belt, we want to make sure it has proper tension, and we want to make sure that the ribs do not have too many cracks, and we want to make sure that the clearances between the ribs is appropriate. This is also a good time to check ignition wires if the vehicle is equipped with them, or anything else under the hood that you might be able to see visual damage on. Now we're going to check the oil, even if it's getting an oil change. First, you want to have the vehicle on a level surface, which is usually not a problem in a shop. clean off the end of the dipstick, and then put it back in the tube and remove it. Now we're going to be checking the oil condition as well as the level. We want to make sure the oil comes up to the top of the crosshatched area, and we want to make sure the oil is not black or looks milky. Then simply replace the dipstick, and now we're going to check the transmission fluid. In order to check transmission fluid, the engine must be running. And we simply repeat a similar process to what we used to check oil. Remove the transmission fluid dipstick, which is usually orange or red. Clean off the end of it. Replace it back into the transmission dipstick tube. And pull it out again. Now with transmission fluid, if you have to add any, you want to make sure that you add the correct type. Sometimes that's even labeled on the dipstick. The dipstick will also tell you if the vehicle should be hot or cold when checking the transmission fluid level, and if the engine should be running or not. Now for this particular vehicle, we do have a dipstick and it does have a hot and cold range. Now we're going to take the dipstick and check the condition of the fluid, which on here it looks pretty good, but just to be sure we can put a small dab on a white piece of paper to make sure that it doesn't look abnormally dark or gray. So this vehicle looks okay. Next, we want to check the battery. Now to check the battery, we're going to use a very simple battery tester. All you have to do, since it is self-powered, is attach it to the battery. So our negative clamp is going to go onto the negative battery cable, and our positive clamp is going to go onto our positive battery cable. And you want to make sure that you scratch the surface of the battery terminal to make sure you have good contact. Now the tester is asking us if the battery is in the vehicle or out of the vehicle. In vehicle simply means that the battery is attached to the car through the battery terminals. Now it's asking us what our cold cranking amp rating is. For this battery, the cold cranking amps are much higher. We are actually in the 650 CCA range, which will be labeled on the battery. Simply hit enter and the battery tester will test the battery for us. Here it says that this battery actually has 697 CCA. If you come across this, sometimes it indicates that you have a surface charge on the battery and you simply need to turn the headlights on for about a minute and then turn them off and retest. Now we're going to check the condition of our air filter. Some air filter housings or air cleaner assemblies are attached by screws like this one. Others are attached by clips. Either way, simply remove them and take the filter out, and you want to inspect the filter. You want to make sure that it's not too dirty. Basically, if you hold it up to the light, you should be able to see light coming through it. Also, you want to check to see if there's any debris around the filter, and you want to check inside the air filter box as well and remove any leaves or debris that may be in there. An often overlooked filter is the cabin air filter. On some of them, it's underneath the cowl, and you simply have to remove a set of push pins in order to remove that cowl piece and the weather stripping as well. Now when you are removing the cowl piece, be careful not to damage any washer fluid hoses that may be attached. So simply set it aside, remove any other pieces that may be in the way of the air filter, and slide the cabin air filter out. Now this one you can see is obviously in bad condition. It has lots of debris in it, and when we open the pleats, we can see that there's a fair amount of dirt in between the pleats. Then you simply put the assembly back together and reinstall the weather stripping and the 2 push pins. Another type of cabin air filter is located behind the glove box. You simply push the sides of the glove box in to release the 2 tabs, and the glove box folds over and you can access the cabin air filter. There are 2 tabs on the side of the air filter that you can either push in or out to remove that air filter housing. This cabin air filter also obviously needs to be replaced. Now we're going to set the rack. We want to ensure that our legs are spread as far apart as possible and that our feet are close to the frame and positioned on opposing angles from each other. So for instance, the rear was facing backwards and the front feet are facing forwards. Now we can raise our vehicle until the wheels are off of the ground, and we're going to shake the vehicle to ensure that it does not fall off of the lift and that it is stable enough to raise it further so that you can go underneath the vehicle. Now first, you're going to raise it to a decent working height and move the tire back and forth and up and down ever so slightly. This way you can check for any play in the suspension and steering components. Now you're going to want to check the condition of the tire using a tread depth gauge. So we simply check the tread depth using this tread depth gauge, and it will show us how many millimeters of tread we have left. Ideally, when we check tread, we want to check across the surface of the tire and in 3 different locations around the tire. Next, you want to check the actual tread wear. So sometimes tread might wear on the inside edge, on the outside edge. It may be cupped or feathered, indicating that we may need suspension components replaced, an alignment, or simply a tire needs to be balanced. When removing lug nuts and hubcaps, make sure you put them in a safe place, such as a nearby bench. Now when you remove the tire, be sure to use your legs and not your back. Also, do not place a tire underneath of a rack. In case you have to lower the vehicle, the rack will sit on top of the tire and damage it. So you want to ensure that the tires are placed out of the way. Now you want to check the friction material on the pad between the backing and the rotor. If the green end fits in between those 2 spaces, then your brakes are good. If the red end barely fits or does not fit, then brakes should be changed immediately. Anywhere in between the green and the red would be considered yellow, and the customer should be notified they'll need brakes soon. Now once we're underneath the vehicle, we want to check various components, such as our CV boots. They have a tendency to crack in the centers, and that'll sling grease everywhere. Our sway bar link here attaches our lower control arm to our sway bar link, so that'll make a rattle if it ever comes loose. Also, now's a good time to check your brake lines and this side of the spring, making sure that there isn't any excessive rust or breaks in the spring. On the other side, if we had movement with the tire moving in and out, it could be our outer tie rod end or our inner tie rod end. With the outer tie rod end, you could wrap your hand around the tie rod end and the knuckle, move the wheel in and out, and see if there's any play. For our inner, you simply grab onto the inner tie rod end and pull down hard and see if you hear any clicks. Also be sure to check the other side of the spring while you are on this side of the vehicle. Now we're going to check our 4-wheel drive system. So the front differential here, you just want to make sure it doesn't have any leaks and that all the electrical connections are secure and there's no obvious damage. Many times you will find a vehicle that is leaking oil. A lot of times it will look as if it's dripping from the oil pan, but oil flows from the top down. So even though you might see oil dripping from the oil pan, it might actually be coming from a valve cover. Now we're checking the condition of any bushings or drive shaft joints that we may be able to observe from this angle, all the while ensuring that there aren't oil leaks coming from any other location other than the engine. Sometimes oil leaks also come from the transmission area. Exhaust components typically leak where there are two parts joined together. You'll see a fine carbon soot. Flex pipes often fail as well because they're always moving up and down, expanding, contracting, and therefore you'll also find that carbon soot there as well if the flex pipe has cracked. Now check the entire length of the exhaust system to ensure that all the rubber hangers are still in place and in good condition, as well as any exhaust clamps that you may find. The muffler normally has a weep hole located in it to ensure that any moisture and condensation can drain out. Do not mistake this for a faulty muffler. In addition to feeling the application of the parking brake, it's always important to ensure that the parking brake cables themselves are not seized up internally. Also, be sure to check the rear springs and shocks. Now for the rear, there are also sway bar links that need to be inspected, as well as potentially a rear differential that may be leaking, such as this one. When checking the shock, look to see if there's any oil residue left on the outside of the tube. Also check the parking brake cable where it meets the rear parking brake assembly. Now you want to ensure that all the brake lines are in good condition and are not excessively rusty or, in the worst case scenario, actually broken and leaking. Since we notice this rear differential is leaking, we want to look on the back side and make sure that the pinion seal that's attached to the drive shaft is in good condition and that we're only dealing with a leaking cover. When you've completed your inspection, tighten all lug nuts by hand to prevent cross-threading with the impact. Use a torque stick to ensure that all lug nuts are tightened to the proper specification, and tighten your lug nuts in a star pattern. Last but not least, it's important to check tire pressure. This gauge is reading that this tire has been inflated to about 29 psi, which we can see by looking at the safety certification label that's located on the driver's side door jamb that we need to add a little bit of air. Once you're done, be sure to replace the cap. Now you're ready to lower the vehicle, reset any maintenance lights that may be necessary, and be sure to leave a copy of the multi-point inspection sheet on the passenger side seat.